Today, we're going to do a walkthrough of the Environmental Accounting Platform. To log into the EAP, you can go to AIA Now, to log in, you just need your email address. Every time you want to log in, there is no need for a password. You'll get a code to your email address every single time. Just enter your code from your email. You go to New Property, and then there's two ways you can do it. You can either do your property in the ether, you just need to manually select the region, or you can zoom into the parcel of land and click the lot and plan there itself, which is what we'll be doing today. Notice how region gets automatically selected. You put in your property name, what kind of enterprise runs here. So today we're going to be doing grains, sheep to show off the cross commodity part of the calculator. We also got some renovated pastures and some plantings as well, because we can claim the sequestration from trees as a minus on our emissions profile. The other step you have to do is to choose whether you get more than 600 mil or less than 600 mil rainfall, as this affects the leaching and runoff from your fertilizer use. The option of adding multiple properties as well. So if you have individual blocks, you can run it as individual blocks. Now, in my farm, you will see that on the left-hand side, there is data and analysis, business activities, commodities and products. Commodities and products is only relevant if you're shipping finished goods outside the farm gate. Mapping, there is the opportunity to map out individual paddocks and areas of trees. You can either do that by uploading KMLs or drawing the shapes yourself, but most of the action happens here in business activities. So in business activities, the first tab is enterprise and land management, where your actual farming activities happen. So here you will note that all the commodities we entered when setting up the property are present. So sheep, cropping, pasture, and trees. You also note that there's dates running across a year, because with emissions accounting, you are running it to an emissions year. It's your choice how you line it up, about whether you do it to a calendar year, a financial year, or a year you're choosing. But keep in mind that if you do want a whole of enterprise result, you do need to line up a consistent emissions year. So for example, here we've gone to a calendar year because that best lines up with our winter cropping. To add a new crop, you go add, you choose the name of the crop, and then the start date of the crop, keeping in mind you want to keep it in line with your consistent emissions year. Now, with doing your crops as well, you can do all your crops as one, e.g. if you've got 100 hectares of wheat across 2 paddocks, you can just lump them together, or you can do it individually at the paddock level, which is what we're doing today. Now, with the area planted, you can either just put in the amount here, or you can manage it on the map if you've added in paddocks. So here, because I drew out some paddocks before, I can go add, confirm, done, and then I'll work out the hectares for me here. Next, you select the crop type, the yield, which you can do the total yield, or you can calculate it per hectare. And then finally, you just tick whether it's irrigated or not, and whether there was crop residue burned or not, which will affect your emissions at the end. After clicking save down the bottom, next we'll move on to how is the soil improved, which is liming and fertilizer. For liming, you can choose a name and a date if you want, but it's not mandatory. But for your liming, you just choose the type of lime, whether it's dolomite or limestone, and the application rate per hectare in tons. Fertilizer is similar, where you can choose a name and a date if you so wish, but it's just a case of choosing the fertilizer type from the drop-down menu, and then the application rate per hectare in kilograms. So for us, we're just going to add in some potash at a rate of 40 kilograms per hectare. Next, we're going to add in some urea at 60. And then finally, we're going to add in some DAP at 90. You will notice here that when you choose the fertilizer type, it breaks it down per an element. The final step with our crop is chemical use. So we'll go to the final tab, where for our chemical applications, there's 2 ways you can do it. One is just choosing a single product, where you choose a product from the drop-down menus. So in this case, glyphosate, and then the application rate per hectare. So in this case, we'll just chuck in 2. But the other way is to calculate per total active ingredient, which is a bit more complicated. So here you'll notice there's no convenient drop down. It's just you choose whether it's glypho, paraquat, or diquat, or other. In this case, it's prosophocarb, which isn't on the drop down list here, so we have to do it manually. So for prosophocarb, we need to work out the total amount of active ingredient applied in tons. So for us, we've done an application rate of 2.5 liters per hectare. It's about 80% active ingredient. So we've got to times 2.5 by 0.8 by our 10.55 hectares, which gives us an answer of 21 kilograms. So per tons, we need to go 0.021. Something to keep in mind here is that, yes, it is in tons. So if we were to write in 21 here, instead of 0.021, we would get an inaccurate result. We have now finished inputting data for our crops, so we'll move on to the next tab in business activities, energy and commodity consumption. So here we have electricity, fuel, and commodity purchases. Commodity purchases are things like, if you're buying hay, grain, or cottonseed for your livestock enterprise. So we'll go on to electricity, where you have the choice of adding a name and a date. But other than that, it's just choosing a source about whether it's from the state grid or renewable, and the amount. Keep in mind, if you have a mixture, you'll just need to put in 2 separate inputs. In terms of finding this number here, it should be found on your BAS. For fuel, similar to electricity, you can get this number from BAS. But to get a more accurate number, you can have a go at doing it at the paddock level, which is what I've done here today. So just a quick note with fuel as well. Similar to electricity, you need to break it down by source, whether it's diesel, petrol, or LPG, because it will have separate emissions factors. And if you've got a mixture, you need to do individual inputs. As things stand, the emissions from our inputs here are attached to our whole of enterprise, but not attached to individual commodities. To attach to individual commodities, you go to allocation to enterprises. And then here you have the opportunity to attach it to the commodities present in enterprises and land management. So we go into electricity. You can see you just split it up by percentage between the commodities. You might have to do a little bit of guesswork yourself here. But for our fuel use, because we did it to the paddock level, we can be very accurate and say, 100% of the fuel we benchmarked for Webb's barley goes towards Webb's barley. You can also tack on emissions reductions from trees, which will give us a chance to go back and have a look about how you add in trees. So for trees, you will note here that it's not running to a year like the individual commodities. It's just a start date. Once again, just try and line that up. But when you go into it to add trees, it's just a case of choosing the amount of hectares, which you either write it in or draw it on a map. Say the region where the trees are present. Note that not every region is here. You might just have to pick the closest one to you. E.g. for me, Tintinara is between the southeast and the Murray, so I've just gone with the southeast. And then when you go down, choose soil type, species, age of trees. And from that, using the full count model, some emission sequestration will be estimated. And then you can have the choice about what enterprise or commodity you attach those emission reductions to. So for me, for my cropping enterprise, split it 50-50 between our 2 barley crops. So with our trees, we are now actually finished inputting data for our property, and we can now go look at our results. So for our results, when you first go to it, it will give you results for your whole of enterprise, where it will give you an emissions breakdown per scope, and also an emissions breakdown from greenhouse gas source, about whether it's methane, CO2, or nitrous oxide. You'll notice in your results here that it is all written in tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. The reason for this is in emissions accounting, you benchmark everything to CO2, so you're comparing apples to apples. Similar to livestock, how you might be converting everything into a DEC just to make things a bit more simpler and a bit more easier to count against each other. Just a quick note on scope emissions as well, for those that might be interested. So here we have our scope 1 emissions, which are emissions that happen directly on farm. So that's things like fuel use, fertilizer use on the farm. Scope 2 is electricity, which, as I said, isn't very much in the grand scheme of things. And then Scope 3 is the emissions that have gone into the manufacturing of fertilizer and chemicals, and also emissions from transporting stuff to the farm. To break down per commodity and more detailed GHG analysis, you can go into calculating emissions for and choose the enterprise there. So for our cropping enterprise, we can see here we have our emissions for our entire cropping enterprise, but if we want to break it down to the paddock level or whatever input we put into business activities, we can go into select activity and go into there. So for our wheat, we can see we not only have our emissions per scope, but our emissions breakdown is very specific about where the emissions are coming from. So here we can see our largest contributor was CO2 emissions from fuel, closely followed by emissions that went in the manufacturing of our fertilizer. And further down, you can see a breakdown further on. Down the very bottom, we have our emissions intensity, which I know for most farmers, they might be interested in their total enterprise emissions, but they're probably more interested in their emissions intensity because after all, in Australia, no farm is the same, but a ton of wheat is a ton of wheat, and you can compare apples to apples from doing this. So here with emissions intensity, we can see it's 0.25 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per a ton of wheat. For your reference, in Australia, it's normally between 0.2 and 0.3. So we're middle of the range here with our emissions intensity, which when we go into canola, we can see our emissions breakdown is slightly different to our wheat. A lot more fertilizer was used, which has dwarfed our fuel use. And if we go down to our emissions intensity, we are 0.54 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per a ton of canola, which in Australia is between 0.5 and 0.6. So once again, we're middle of the range here. And FYI, in terms of exploiting results, there's two ways you can do it. The first way is to export PDFs, which are better off to do it at the crop or individual business activity level because it will have more detail, e.g. these details here. If you do it a whole of enterprise, it won't have this emissions breakdown. And another way as well is you can export CSVs, which will have all the inputs and calculations in there as well. Last but not least, we will go look at our barley. So for our barley, you would have remembered that we included some sequestration from trees, which is present here. So if we go down to our emissions intensity, we can see that without the trees, we're at 0.19 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per ton of barley. But with trees, we've gone down to 0.16. In terms of moving these numbers here, there's three ways you can do it. The first way is to increase your yield with the same inputs. So that just means you're spreading the emissions from your fertilizer and fuel use wider over more tonnage of crops. The other way is to get similar yields with lower inputs, which means that there's just less emissions going in there in the first place. And the third and final way is using trees to your advantage to claim some emissions reduction and emission sequestration. On this, we'll finish. Big thanks today for watching the video.